Wanted to introduce Jose Padin. I'm going to read this off. I did not commit it to memory here. Jose is from Zscaler's U.S. Public Sector Senior Director of Sales Engineering. He engages with the government customers at a strategic level to identify solutions to their top IT challenges, including security and compliance, digital transformation, and cloud migration. Jose combines 20 years of IT leadership with more than 15 years of the experience in the public sector, including advising the Department of Defense, federal civilian agencies, federal system integrators, and state and local governments. And I'm just going to skip right to the end so he can continue to give a little bit more of his background, but I did want to mention the fact that he does have a degree in Management Information Systems from Rochester Institute of Technology. I'm sure you all know that one. That's pretty impressive. And he is based out of Washington, D.C. So with further ado,
all right. Thank you, Bert, for the intro. So my name is Jose Padin. I'm the Director of Engineering for Public Sector here at Zscaler. And what all that big intro meant is I have worked building castles originally. 25 years ago, putting together IT, building the castles that existed in infrastructure today. And I spent the last 15 years helping our government find ways to work anywhere, anytime, on any device, and do that securely. And specifically within the last 30 months, what's been incredible is the rapid amount of change to be able to help move towards a zero trust strategy. So what was really, Dr. Farley had a funny joke earlier, if you have Santa Claus, Easter Bunny, and someone who implemented zero trust, who's going to get the $5 in the middle? I think that was an accurate and correct joke in 2019. As a result of the pandemic, we've seen so much implementation of zero trust within the government, specifically that I could fill a room this size of people that have implemented zero trust principles within government infrastructure today and are continuing to grow and expand on that going forward. So what I thought would be really interesting today is to get into some of the policy that's driving this change and then get into some practical ways that you could find wins and areas that we've seen people be successful in the future and where we've had implementations today. But before I get started, let's just talk. Who has a definition of what zero trust is? Anybody in the room want to venture a guess? There's a pair of socks here for anyone who wants to. All right. What's zero trust?
Everybody and everything's in front, inside and outside.
Yep. I think that is a 100% accurate statement. Threats are everywhere, and we need to make sure that we take that into our design considerations as we build networks. But what I think is something that hopefully after the end of this presentation we'll have concrete definition of what zero trust is, because it is a strategy. There's not versions to zero trust. There's not different ways of a product that's going to go give you zero trust if you go buy it. It is a strategy. It's a different way to think about infrastructure. It's a different way to think about access. And the great news is, specifically within the last 24 months, there's been very concrete definitions of what zero trust is and how that can be adopted. So we'll get into a little bit of that as we get into here. We'll get into the goals, and then we'll talk a little bit about a program that just was released 15 days ago, not even, about SLTT and some of the funding that's going on around that. And then we'll break down the pillars and go into some of the areas that you could think about from a win perspective. And again, try to make zero trust concrete in everyone's mind. It's no longer a marketing term. It's no longer something that people just say. It is a strategy that is well defined by CISA, and we have the opportunity to all be at the lead in implementing these strategies in our infrastructure today and going forward. So one thing that I want to break down, and this is what's really driving a lot of the impetus, especially in government, within federal government and state government, the definition and the move to zero trust is now essentially a mandate. OMB came out, it's called 2209, you could go read it. And it breaks down the maturing of cybersecurity in the government. And this is not limited to federal government. This is to all government agencies, as well as a definition, a roadmap that can be used outside of the government. It's a really good breakdown, and they call out some specific areas. A lot of 2209 is a to-do list, and there are things that they're asking people to do and agencies to move forward to define certain things. But it's a great breakdown of why we need to move to zero trust and specifically areas to focus on to get wins. So highly recommend taking a look at 2209 and looking into what that means for you and some of the definitions that are in there. But specifically what I think is important is that enterprise applications need to be treated as if they are accessed externally from wherever they happen to be. And this, as a driving force for a lot of what we see within Zero Trust, is important to think about. The key to this is because with Zero Trust, if we just assume and we have implicit trust to a user or device just because they happen to be on an application network segment, that is what has driven so much compromise. Just by being on a network, allowing trust, allowing people to scan, see what's on the network, be able to try different exfils, this is how we have been compromised in the past. So the real question is, why would we do that in the future? If we know this is what happens, someone clicks on an email, something comes down into that local device, it gets hold of that local OS, it starts scanning within that network, finds other devices that can be compromised, moves laterally into those devices that can be compromised, sets up some type of command and control outbound, and then exfils data. This is how the standard works. Even the most complicated exploits like SolarWinds, they worked like that. It was very simple how it worked. It was very difficult of how they were able to get into these environments, but the actual exfil of data was relatively simple. We know how this works. So why would we continue to build networks that allow this type of connectivity? That's really the heart of why the impetus to change is out there, is that we can do something different. The technology is there. It doesn't require rip and replace. You don't have to go buy, a next version of a hardware box in order to do this. You can implement zero trust strategies in your infrastructure today, and you can be able to get quick wins today, specifically called out in this mandate in order to build confidence in the government moving towards zero trust in the short term. So, from there, and this is what's really important to think about from a state perspective, is CISA defined this, OMB rolled this out, we have an idea of zero trust. And now the state and local cybersecurity grant program came out. It's essentially an extension of the definition of moving to zero trust that happened. Again, this is rapid. Think about this in government terms. This was released in March of 2022. People moved forward with zero trust initiatives throughout that, and now there's a large grant funds that are coming down to the state and local government all around the same idea of moving towards a zero trust and maturing your cybersecurity maturity. It's $1 billion program, and it has the ability to allow states and local governments to get funding on multi-year programs to move forward in maturing their cybersecurity. So highly recommend looking to this. There's actually grants that are due. This was released March 15, 2022. Grants are due in 45 days from that. So there is an opportunity to go look at this from a multi-year perspective. Also, the request from the government is to put committees together to look at opportunities to mature cybersecurity and find paths forward. So again, this is coming down and coming down fast. And there's a real reason why this is being the impetus for change, is because we have to do something different to prevent the ransomware exploits that are there, to prevent common command and control that are out there. We need to look at our castles and think about ways that we could get wins that don't rely on security just happening to be inside a certain network segment. These are some of the details that I hit on the funding. Applications are due, but just want to put this out there, not from the fact that go out and get these. There's many people, I'm sure, within the state of Delaware and other local areas that are looking at this to put this together. But the fact is, this is a trend that will likely continue. As we built IT, we were there as service providers to be able to partner with the business to offer constituent services and services for our state governments. What is likely going to change around some of these funding requirements is that we're going to see more and more federal funding tied to maturing cybersecurity. So if the state, the local government does not have the right programs in place to secure the information that's being shared, it can affect actual funding, which can affect the actual government being able to go to market and provide services. This is a trend that we see happening now, and it's likely going to change in the future as more and more emphasis is being put on maturing your cybersecurity. So it's call to action, awareness. Think about this, and think about this the next time you implement a new system in your infrastructure, next time you're going to market for constituent-facing information sharing. There may be a better way to architect and design that today that will put you in a good spot next year, 3 years, 4 years out in order to help your state and local government get the funding it's needed in order to operate. And with that, what does that mean? What do you have to do, right? What does zero trust mean? What does this cybersecurity maturity mean? Highly recommend looking at CISA's document. CISA is doing an excellent job of being a leader in defining this, not just for government, but just the entire marketplace. They're really putting together policies to bake together the ideas and thoughts that we've had for a long time about change. And again, if we go back to the keynote, right, and we talk about the history of zero trust, 2005 is when we started talking about deperimeterizing, right, Jericho Project. 2010 is when Forrester released, here is the word, coined the phrase zero trust. These aren't new ideas, right? In IT terms, 17 years ago, 12 years ago, that's huge, right? That's like, 50 years in IT terms is, if we think about dog years of being 7 years, in IT terms, it's about, 12 years is a single human year. That's a long time ago these ideas have been floating around. And the issue, and we have codified them, we put them in, we've tried different things, but what's happening right now is that because of the epidemics that have happened in cybersecurity throughout the pandemic, as vulnerable systems were exposed with more remote users, there had to be a change in defining and codifying that. And that's what we're seeing with what's happened with CISA. Really great read, highly recommend it, and this framework you're gonna see everywhere, right? You already saw it, at least at the keynote, probably in session later today. You're gonna probably see it in sessions in the future, today, and going on. This framework of how to think about maturing your cybersecurity and how to break it down in specific pillars, and then within the pillars actually define certain areas that you could focus on, is, again, I think just a great methodology, a great way to think about this. And again, it's a strategy. It's not a product. You don't go buy zero trust. You don't go buy mature cybersecurity. You don't buy version 2 something and then you have zero trust. It is a strategy to think about and look at your systems and think about where you can find opportunities for maturity along these pillars. So again, highly recommend take a look at it. Highly recommend, kind of break that down and think about it in those terms, right? We all built castle and moats. I built castle and moats. It was the way that we did business, right? We created a perimeter. We made it really hard. Inside, it was nice and gooey, and you could move around, do whatever you needed to, right? You try to make smaller and smaller networks and try to do that with microsegmentation. All of these projects have been around for 5-6 years, very limited success generally in a project like that, and you end up creating these catalogs of rules that are basically impossible to implement, and everything just ends up going to star. So how do we change this to a way that can comprehend that? Why would we trust a network with users on it ever? Why would we ever do that? We don't need to do that. There's no reason to actually technically trust a network with laptops that come in and out of the network, especially today that we're moving more to hoteling. People are coming and going. These laptops are everywhere. Why would we trust a network ever with that? Treat it like the internet. Get security around that. Get visibility into what the users are doing and protect your apps and data. That's high level the change from a castle and moat to what we're seeing in cybersecurity maturity models here and zero trust. So with that, I'll kind of break down some of the goals specifically around what we're seeing in 2209, and that's carrying to SLTT, that's carrying down to the local and state governments, and look at some definition and just a little bit of ideas around the pillars and what they mean. So, before I get into that, any questions about, CISA's cybersecurity maturity model, anything when it comes down to what we're seeing in trends in the future? And, again, for this session, feel free to interrupt, ask questions. If there's something you want clarified, like go for it. It's great to have a conversation here. I could talk about this for like 3 hours if you want. But from a high level perspective, it's great to steer the conversation any way that you want. So if you have questions, comments, concerns, please bring them up. And you might get a nice pair of socks or got some stickers here, got all kinds of stuff. So you could be rewarded for that interaction. So when we break down the pillars, the first is identity. And this is, obviously really important because when we change from implicit access to a device that happens to be inside of a network to making sure that we understand the user context, the application context, and why a user's connecting, the first thing that we need to do is understand the user identity. Now, the great news when it comes to state government and when it comes to local governments or when it comes to people transforming from today going forward is that the identity problem is really well defined and understood. There are standards-based that are out there that can easily be leveraged, and most likely what you're using for your core identity store today can easily use standards-based like SAML 2.0, can use SCIM for provisioning. The technology is there, they're tried and true, they're really well defined, they work really well. If you're an AD shop, you could set up ADFS really simply. If you don't have anything, Okta, other identity systems are out there really great standards-based. That's the first step, and it's not as difficult as it sounds from a change management. We have taken people from a pandemic with 0 external-facing IDP to 10,000 users lit up in the state government over a weekend. And it sounds like crazy when you say it, right? I understand that. And I thought it was a little bit crazy too because when the program started and we got the call saying these are COVID responders, we need them to have access, we can't get silicon to be able to allow more VPN, we need something. We had a pilot that we're kicking off to start on a Wednesday. On a Thursday, the call was, we need to light this up in production, and we worked with the state to be able to do this. I called the head of engineering and the head of cloud product and said, hey, can we really light this up in 72 hours and get all these users on? They said, we have multiple 100,000 implementations that are going into production. We got you. This will work. These are COVID responders. Like, this has to work, and this has to work well, and we can't have any issues. High degree of confidence. We went to market, and we were able to roll this out. So that state in particular, when we go back to the joke from earlier today, they could get the $5, and they could beat the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus to it because they rolled out zero trust principles over a weekend in a state government in order to respond to COVID at a massive scale. It's an incredible story. I've been around the government for 15 years, right? I understand how change management works. I understand how things can go at the pace of government, but this is a response that was needed. Government act quickly. We help support and make that a reality, and it happened quickly without even having an external IDP when we started this project. So it's really incredible, story, but it's also true. You can move quickly if you need to. It doesn't require you to rip and replace everything that you have. You can leverage the investment that you have. Because at the end of the day, zero trust is a team sport. It takes a lot of people, a lot of vendors, a lot of coordination to be able to have successful zero trust implementations, even at a lower cybersecurity maturity model, right? Because it's a graduated scale. You don't just do everything at the highest level of maturity. You're able to get wins at a lower level, move your way up throughout that. It's a team sport. It takes the ecosystem. These are a lot of major players that are out there that are working on zero trust. If a vendor comes to you and says, hey, I got you, buy my zero trust solution, buy version 2.0 zero trust, you're good to go. That's not how this works. You need to be able to work with multiple different partners to be able to get there. And our instrumentation here, specifically Zscalers, is made for open API to understand the ecosystem. But just keep that in mind, right? Many of the people on here might already be in your implementation, and you could leverage the technologies that allow you to implement a zero trust solution. And you might need to look for investment areas in others. But again, from a first stage perspective, if you get your identity, external facing identity out there, it gives you a lot of ways that you can start leveraging this technology, constituent facing, internal user access, securing those users. You get a lot of idea about the context of the user, who they are, what they're trying to access, and where they're going. And then from there, you could layer on areas of security. You could look at endpoint and EDR maturity around that. There's more to it than just network access, right? It's more to it than changing a firewall rule, but it doesn't have to be that complex. And these vendors understand this is the trend. The instrumentation is built into a lot of the technologies to be able to allow you to implement this, and we can work together to make successful implementations in the government. So again, keep that in mind. Zero Trust is a team sport, and we need to work with our partners in order to implement successfully. So if we get down to devices next and think about what we're doing here, what's really interesting specifically when we get into device is that the proliferation and the change in device posture for government agencies over the last 30 months has been pretty considerable. I went around, talked to people about remote systems and how to get them implemented, and they would tell me, no, sorry, our users only use government furnished equipment, that's it, that's all they could do. Don't have to worry about remote access, they got to cover, they come to the office, they do their work, or they use the VPN when they're at home, right? Well, that changed, right? And it had to change, and it was forced to change based on events over the last 30 months. So we've seen a lot different access that's been allowed, but that changes the concerns that a government has around being able to know who's accessing what and what's going on. And if someone's on a home device and they're accessing cloud service outside of my network, how do I know that they're secure? How do I know what they're doing? There's a loss of visibility that happens in some of these access. There's a loss of ensuring certain security standards are in place when accessing certain systems on the back end. That's changed. So we're seeing one change in what instrumentation that we need to have at the device perspective, and then we're changing the need to have visibility into that device. So again, here the first stage of this is go get a list of assets, right? There's many different technologies that are out there to be able to do that. There's one way that we think is if you see what devices are accessing your applications and mission critical data, right, through authenticated access methods, we can itemize that as well. So it's not just itemize your devices that GFE, and see where they are, but let's see what else is accessing this information now that we've maybe changed our profile, and get a little better grasp on what our users look like and what the device profile of those users. So it's a different way that you could go to business. It's a different way to think about this, and it gives you some ability to get a better control on what's going on. And what's really interesting is part of this mandate too is a list of compromised vulnerabilities that we know are out there and that you need to ensure are covered. That's really what BOD 2201 is in essence, right? To get coverage for these things. So you can check on the device if it's there. You can also check from a network flow perspective if there are certain indicators of compromise of these. So it's a good program. If you haven't looked at this or aren't aware, definitely check it out. The list is updated all the way. CISA is here. They publish any updates to these lists, and any other systems that you have should be either integrated directly with this to automatically update. If not, some interaction needs to happen to make sure that you have these. But this is kind of a foundational element to make sure that what you have in your network is secure. And then, the next pillar is we break down to network. So here we see a lot of movement and a lot of change. And this is where the security perimeter has changed. So instead of the focus being on network perimeter, encrypt all your traffic, right? That's really important. Understand your DNS. Why? Because users aren't in networks anymore. They're everywhere. We need to make sure that we have protective idea of what that DNS is. And then develop enterprise strategies around this. And I think that piece is the key here. Because you can get wins, you can turn on some feature here or there, and maybe you can kind of have a strategy that will work in a one-off scenario. But if you start thinking big picture, how do I create an enterprise solution that gives me the visibility, the security into the network access, that can give me a little bit of idea of what's going on from a device perspective, and do this in a repeatable, systematic way across multiple systems? Creating a framework and strategy that allows you to bring on new systems or get access to new apps and data, right? That mindset and that strategy, again, not a product, but a strategy, right? Think about how you can put this into play, puts you in a much better spot for creating, a cybersecurity maturity access method today, but also helping you in the future for that next system that you know is going online, or the next new one, or the one after that. So thinking about enterprise-wide, how to create repeatable systems that can help, that's the key part to this piece, in my opinion, and something that definitely would highly recommend anyone working on a zero trust strategy, anyone working on a maturity model or looking at just the next system that you're rolling out. How can we build security into the app and data today, but also make it repeatable so that the next time we do it, it's easier to just plug into that infrastructure? Yeah.
What's the best way or the recommendation for managing the encrypted traffic and getting visibility into the encrypted DNS and encrypted HTTP traffic? Most of the tools that are at least relatively easy to use, and if you don't man in the middle, it makes it very challenging to go through and give me metrics on that.
Yeah, and this is where, actually, you know what, I gotta give you at least one parasol. Here, you get a sticker and Post-it notes, because you couldn't have teed up the next slide any better, because I'm gonna break that down. And I'll get into that. So traditionally, I mean, break and encrypt, or break and inspect has existed a long time. Anyone who tried to implement it, say 10 years ago, I mean, you need a lot of RAM, a lot of CPU, a lot of big boxes. There's complexity of being able to roll out the cert at the user level, changes and managing that. It could be a nightmare. And then let's just say you implement it from your perimeter out, right? Now users start going on, you blow through that RAM and CPU, you have to upgrade those boxes. And then from an external perspective, you're hairpinning people that need to get access to cloud apps. All the apps and data moved into different cloud services, and I'm forcing people to hairpin back into an internal network in order to break and inspect, in order for them to go to the cloud. So that whole problem, I think, has been solved, and that's really where I could break down some type of infrastructure connection. So I could, that question specifically, I could kind of break down and walk you through what a connection would look like, how it can be implemented, and what it looks like today from a cloud security perspective. So if we look on this slide right here, this is standard infrastructure components. Pretty much everybody has this, right? You have some type of device, probably an EDR, some type of virus on the endpoint. You have some type of identity, right? It could be external facing or internal, but some type of identity store exists, an AD, Okta, something. You have various SOC, and there's SIM and SOAR that might be there. You have your analyst team, and then you have your different cloud services. So, people going out to different access on the internet, they need to do that. People getting access to specific SaaS that you have subscribed for them. Infrastructure as a service components for your environment, and then traditional on-prem data centers where you have infrastructure. So all of this, standard infrastructure, pretty much everything on here, everyone has inside their network. So if we break down what a connection looks like, based, specific to your question, we can, break down what this would look like as we mature our cybersecurity. So the first step is get your identity and use standard space. It's no longer a debate. It's 2022. The outside of government, a SAML 2.0 base, provisioning automatically through SCIM. This is the standard. It's something that I highly recommend if you don't have, look into. You're going to need it not only for going down this path, but for multiple different services out there, right? So move to that. Can be relatively simple depending on what you have to get that first step in play. But once it's there, then it's very easy for this system or any system to use that source of identity. And what's key about this is you do not want to start to create multiple sources of identity and multiple systems constantly that you have to groom, manage, maintain, talk to each other. If you have one source of identity, or there might be business process, you have external facing, contractor, internal, but limited number, get to that limited number and allow yourself to have one place that you're worrying about who users are, right? This is a good first step. But once it's there, then it's relatively easy. User provisioning can happen, and I can use any type of multi-factor authentication you want, right? So CAC and PIV in the federal world, whatever two-factor you have, the identity provider is handling multi-factor, and you don't have to worry about that proliferating into multiple different systems and having to replicate that same wheel multiple times. That's the reason why everybody moved to this. That's the reason why you get a lot of ROI and value in moving to systems like this. So now, the user's been authorized to get access. The first step in that connection to your question is from the device to the security cloud. So once that security cloud is there, we could authenticate, authorize the user. They don't get access to any resources. They can't move laterally. It's not a VPN where it's a tunnel created and they can see anything inside. They're not even really accessing the internet yet at this point in time. We want an idea of who this user is from their device. We want an ability to authenticate that and create that connection from the client to the security cloud. We could also see some telemetry on the endpoint. We want to know a little bit about the device, the posture, what's going on. And we could hook into, just like earlier, the ecosystem perspective, the greater ecosystem of EDR that's been, evolving. CrowdStrike's here today. There's many, incredible technologies that are going on to be able to get better real-time information about what's going on the endpoint. So integrate directly with all that great technology there. Now, at this point in time, I can make an access decision, okay? I could say, okay, trust this user, trust this device, I understand what's going on, but only for this point in time for this connection, not implicitly forever, right? Now a user goes to the website. At this point in time, you can get the visibility into that packet because I'm proxying that connection. It's to the security cloud. And at that point in time, from a security and visibility perspective, if the person's on the network, outside the network, wherever they happen to be, you can still get that visibility, and it's going to scale at cloud scale. Specifically for Zscaler, we've been doing this for 12 years. We have over 100 customers on our Gov Cloud, which is FedRAMP High and FedRAMP Moderate certified. We have tons of connections on this. This scales at the speed of cloud. So you don't have to worry about investing in hardware or running out of room or running out of RAM and CPU. It's happening in the cloud. At this point in time, too, I could get visibility into what's going on. I could run multiple different traditional security appliance stacks in this transaction at once, right? This gives you a lot of visibility into what the users are doing. And then if I want to add CASB, if I want to add DLP, you can easily add that. That's access to known sites. DLP at this point in time, because we're proxying the connection, doesn't conflict with existing DLP programs that are out there. It's just additive. We're looking at what's in the packet. If there's certain things you want to make sure that don't go out, they won't go out, right? Keep it simple as far as that's concerned. This gives you that ability to scale. This gives you the ability to get visibility to the users and allow people to go to where they're probably going, right? Hairpinning on-prem to go through break and inspect, there really isn't a need to do that anymore. Put it in the cloud where the apps and data are. It's right in the path of the users. In fact, a security cloud like this, specific with Zscaler, we have partnerships with Microsoft. We have partnerships with major SaaS vendors to create a fast lane. So the next hop off the security cloud is always that internet service that they're trying to get access to. So you have a conditioned, consistent network path and consistent user experience on that. Not to mention, we could also show you what the user experience is like. We could give you a baseline. You want to know what it looks like, you could see it. And then if we break down access to private applications, right, at this point in time, outbound only connections from your infrastructure as a service and data centers. So this is a big change in the infrastructure, but it doesn't require rip and replace or big changes in your actual infrastructure. So what we do is there's an app connector. There's on the inside. It's a piece of our cloud that comes down locally. You create definitions of what users are getting access to, and that creates only outbound TLS connections from your infrastructure back to the security cloud. This is a big change. It's not a tunnel. There's no lateral movement. When a user gets access to that application, it's only at that point in time. And if they had access or knew, say, like the whole IP subnets that were in there, other infrastructure that's in there, they couldn't access it because there is no path. It's not defined. There's no way to get to it. They can know everything about that infrastructure as a service location. There is no way for this device to be able to get to other areas within that cloud that aren't defined for zero trust access. Not to mention, you can turn off all inbound access into something like infrastructure as a service enclave like that, so that no one can penetrate that infrastructure as a service, and the only thing allowed out are outbound TLS connections back to the security cloud. So, to kind of answer your question, right? First, do it at the cloud scale, right? And not to mention, the benefit you get here is if there's a 0-day exploit, if there's a day 1 exploit, a day 0 exploit costs like $3 million. There's a whole marketplace, people buy them all the time. A day one exploit costs about $1,000, right? If you're not patched and can't get access to your infrastructure on-prem to patch those day ones, that's why we're seeing a proliferation here. In a security cloud scenario like this, if we see one indicator of compromise or a new threat that's out there, all of the users that are using this service get protection because we update the cloud automatically across all users. Huge benefit in being able to get out of the constant patching systems that you end up getting into with on-prem systems as well. So you get out of the issues with RAM and CPU, you get out of the issues with constantly having to update security stacks. So there's a lot of benefit to looking at a system like this. And again, if we break this down across the cybersecurity maturity model, and we look at this from an aspect of how this helps you in the specific pillars, and how this helps you get access to a different way of going to market as opposed to building castles and moats. We think that this connection model is something that can help today and in the future, and is in alignment with all of the trends that are out there from CISA, from the cybersecurity maturity model, from SLTT, and the funding trends that we're seeing within the state and local government and federal government. So does that answer? Okay.
We're not yet.
Yeah, all right.
I guess specifically when you go through and make your request to, let's just say it's a private, some private internal website, and you're making that request from the device that's on the internet, and okay, I need to go through and make that request. What exactly is the path that it goes through? How is the getting its DNS? Is it something that's already on the device to go through and say, I need to go and get that through the security cloud? Or
Yeah, so we could break that down, and so the question has like it's actually three specific use cases that question has, and I'll break down high level the two, and we have like 9 minutes left. We could probably whiteboard the other ones after too. So there's three different scenarios that you kind of called out in there, so I'll just break down the first one. The first one is I'm a user going in public, right? There we are, because we're the proxy net connection, we will be able to decrypt that traffic, see what's going on there, and then you can put, if there's websites or different categories that you don't want to see, like healthcare or something like that, we won't look at that traffic, we won't have any access to it. Your question about private apps, there's two different ways there that breaks down. One, if it's a internal, like traditionally internal access only private application, okay, that's where that app connector comes in with a definition of that application layer access to that, and the client on this side understands what that is. So if I go to www.internal-app, that we understand that that's an internal app because it's part of the app segment definition that you have. The client will intercept that traffic and then know to create the connection back to the private app. There's also a third scenario, and this is actually something that we're seeing, actually just in the last probably 6 months, really kind of a lot of people are exploring and explode, is public-facing constituent access to applications. So now I have an app that's not 100% private, it is on the internet, but I'm doing some type of authentication or want to know what those users are doing, okay? At this point in time, what we do, we call it browser-based access, but it's essentially defining the DNS. We take the A record, it comes to us, right? At that point in time, you can add a social identity, so Facebook, Instagram, some type of identity there to add, or a traditional IDP, and then the users could get access to that, and you could get visibility into who those users are. But it is defined based on a record and DNS, so like we will own that at that point in time if you go down that route. So there's three different kind of use cases there. That's high level where they break down. And again, after this or at another time, we could kind of whiteboard out what that means. Does that help?
Yep.
All right. I love it. I'm glad I gave you all that stuff because you asked some good questions. So I appreciate the conversation. But from a high level, any other questions about what this connectivity or this model looks like? Obviously, this is a branded model. This is I do work for a company, I am employed, but from a high level strategy perspective, this isn't a branded strategy, right? Take your security, put it in the cloud, use the cloud use the capacity that's out there, give visibility into what your users are doing, turn off external access to applications and create only outbound trusted TLS connections to the security broker. You can do this last phase, this purple here, without having to rip and replace your infrastructure. We have people who put this into place. We have the identity, we put the app connector on, and we can get zero trust access relatively in the same day. And you can then turn off any external access into these network segments. So no one can penetrate these devices because there just literally is no path for anyone to get access to them. That does not take a lot of complexity, and that does not take a huge rip and replace. So this is where we see wins in the last 30 months around zero trust, and where we can fill a room this size of government people that have gone to market and have zero trust solutions in production today. It's really following this. And going back to the CISA guidance and the OMB guidance, specifically calls out, find a FISMA moderate application today that is not accessible on the internet, and make it accessible following the cybersecurity maturity profile, and do that like that year, right? And specifically in order to get confidence in following these strategies. That's what it says in the mandate. And it's important to think about, because what this really is saying is start now. Look for opportunities today. Start rolling this out. It's not a 5-10 year program. It's not extremely complex to be able to implement these strategies. You can find wins in your environment in the short term, and you can do that in order to build confidence in larger enterprise systems that you could do in the future. So that's the one thing that I think I'll just close on. I think we're running out of time here. So that's what I'll close on is think about that from a maturity perspective. Think about what you can do to be able to find those opportunities to start using these today, and get started today. Zscaler specifically and my team can help from a consultative perspective to look at some of those systems, help you get to a place where we can look at some of the zero trust strategies that you may have in play, and find some opportunities to help. Not, again, it's not a product, it's a team sport. So it takes multiple, ecosystem to work together to be able to get this to work, but it doesn't have to be complex. We've seen the success in the government, and we could be able to help others get to that area of success to increase your security, make your user experience better, and make it easier to follow the funding paths that we're seeing from a government perspective. Yes?
Just a quick question. What would you for CMMC and Zero Trust, is this something you should set up independently of each other, or is it something that can be built together and implemented at the same time?
Yeah. CMMC?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Perfect. Yeah, so CMMC, it's a great trend. It is, if everyone's not familiar with CMMC, it's the maturity model that's being used and put into place. It's based on 800-207. And there's some accreditation that goes around with that. In order to allow you to do business with a government, you have to follow CMMC. If CMMC is getting baked, there's different levels to that. And in order to get funding from the government, you need to show that you are following the principles of CMMC. It's rooted in 853, which is the root of FedRAMP. All of this stuff kind of comes together from a policy perspective. But the key that we're seeing with CMMC is to isolate and segment off that application and data that are specific to federal government, specific to the program that's part of the CMMC mandate. So if you follow, right, so if we go back, it's a few slides back, but if we think about that purple path, right, if we're able to move our federal specific apps and data into an enclave, turn off access externally to that, and create zero trust out, we have now isolated that federal traffic, the federal data, and we've created a very secure access method to that data that doesn't require, again, you to really change the whole rest of the architecture or infrastructure that you have. So specifically in higher ed, we see this with federal funded research projects. Sometimes, and it's probably the reason why CMMC is out there, I'm not pointing fingers or naming names or anything, but sometimes we see this data that's grant-based federal all over the place, right? Like it's research, there's high-tech machines that are, kind of going through this data, they're trying to figure this out, but the proliferation of that data ends up in multiple different colleges and areas within the university, right? CMMC specifically is calling out, please don't do that. right? Please try to secure that data and keep it consistent. So if we follow these principles from a cybersecurity maturity model, we can allow multiple different systems to access that data without the data being proliferated and copied all over the place. So the answer is yes. We have helped many people, specifically at Zscaler, with CMMC and following those principles to get out in front of the mandate and the funding that's coming. And again, just to help it with other other access methods in the future. But we have a whole team actually that does this. Like when people are trying to figure out how to help with CMMC, we have a whole team of people that help those organizations get to a place where they can show, again, third-party validated. That's the hard part too with CMMC. It's not just self-attestation, which is what 800-207 was. 800-207 was, hey, just tell me you're secure, right? So people, yeah, totally secure. Now there's a move to third-party validation of that. So by using a FedRAMP JAP authorized solution, by using a FedRAMP moderate solution, you get third-party validation that you could pass to your auditors. You set up these strategies, and then you're following an isolation of the application data, and then you're able to achieve CMMC, and you can show that you are able to comply with that in order to help the research funding and help with the program. So that great question. I'm glad you definitely get a pair of socks. All right. I think any other questions from the room? All right. Well, I do want to say thank everybody in this room for coming in, and everybody on the recording too in the future. Hopefully you watch it. Any questions that you have, anything you want to whiteboard or go over, my team's here, I'm here. We have a whiteboard over at our booth. Any scenarios you want to run through, we could run through them and be able to help you anytime you need. So appreciate it. Thank you for the time.